We say that in every act of entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs discover or create information. And the other day, we began to discuss the characteristics of the type of information or knowledge entrepreneurs generate when they act. We looked at the first characteristic. We said that entrepreneurs discover or create knowledge that is subjective, practical, and non-scientific. In addition, we introduced a table to show the dichotomy between two different types of knowledge. Scientific knowledge, which is centralized, can be generally agreed upon and pertains to classes of phenomena, and, in contrast, subjective, entrepreneurial knowledge, which is practical, cannot be acquired from books, and instead can only be obtained through the exercise of action itself, in particular circumstances of time and place. We could say that the only way to gain entrepreneurial knowledge is to use it. Entrepreneurial knowledge pertains to unique events, which are historically unrepeatable, and it is knowledge that cannot be expressed in words. We concluded that success in life does not depend as much on knowledge that can be acquired from books, articulate or scientific knowledge, as on practical entrepreneurial knowledge. Then I posed a rather tricky question to you. I asked you to tell me which type of knowledge I am transmitting to you, which type of knowledge scientific knowledge of economics is. Obviously, it is scientific knowledge, but we obtain it by studying, in formal terms, the flow of entrepreneurial creativity, the processes of discovery, creation, and transmission of the practical knowledge or information that we human beings constantly generate when we act. Entrepreneurial knowledge is exclusive and dispersed. What do I mean by this? When I say it is exclusive, I mean that each human being, each one of us, every man, every woman, possesses, as it were, a few atoms or bits of the information used in society. That is, a tiny amount of all the subjective, practical information people continually generate, discover, handle, and use in society. But that small part, I say atoms or bits to use a metaphor from the natural sciences, and such metaphors are always dangerous, that small part available to each person is private. It is exclusive to that particular person. To put it another way, what you know, what you have here in your mind, and what you have in yours, and what this young woman has in hers, is exclusive or private. Why is this so? Each person starts out with a set of specific circumstances that are historically unrepeatable. They will never exist in exactly the same form in the life of any other human being. They do not exist now in any other human being's life, in any part of the world, nor have they ever existed in precisely the same form in the past, nor will they ever exist in precisely the same form in the future. In other words, our entrepreneurial view of the world, in terms of where we live and the circumstances that surround us, not only our genetic inheritance, but also our influences, the experiences we have had, the ways we have shaped them into memories, and the ways we can recombine them in the mixer, blender, or cocktail shaker of our mind to creatively imagine the future in the form of entrepreneurial expectations is a view that no one else will ever fully share, because the knowledge we each start out with is exclusive. It is private. This should make us feel both proud and a little dizzy. What I am saying is that no matter how similar we may think other people are to us, they can never be identical to us, at least not from the perspective of entrepreneurship, because they each start out with experiences, knowledge, and circumstances that can never be an exact duplicate of ours. To put it another way, we are unique in the universe. We are unique as to our view of our surroundings, and as to our capacity for creativity and entrepreneurship. It is in this sense that entrepreneurial knowledge is not only practical, as we saw last week, but also private, exclusive to each one of us. In fact, this is a huge responsibility, because it means that if an entrepreneurial idea has occurred to us, perhaps no one else has thought of it in exactly the same form. with all the same nuances, with all the same subtleties, and that if we do not take advantage of that act of entrepreneurial creativity, a creative approach of enormous importance in the world may be frustrated. If we miss the bus when one passes through our lives, we may never have another chance of catching it, and what is more, no one may ever have a chance of catching it. Therefore, from the standpoint of entrepreneurship, we must each accept our own exclusive individuality in terms of the private nature of the knowledge that we alone can create. And that depends on the lookout tower from which we see the world, a tower which cannot exist with the very same characteristics in the life of any other human being. I repeat, it is not only that it cannot exist today, it is also that no one in the past has ever shared, nor will anyone in the future ever share, in every detail, the same circumstances that determine our entrepreneurial creativity on a personal human level. Also, the knowledge we are discussing is not exclusive only in this sense. We can also describe it as dispersed knowledge. Hayek often refers to dispersed or divided knowledge. As we will soon see, we all cooperate, and by doing so, we generate a massive, constantly changing flow of entrepreneurial knowledge. And this flow of knowledge is what moves civilization forward, as if through a limitless expansion, a Big Bang. I call it a coordinated social Big Bang, which is always expanding. We all cooperate, and we benefit from a vast volume of knowledge or information, which, nevertheless, is not at our disposal, for of the immense, continually recent entrepreneurial knowledge that we use on a social level, only a tiny part is available to us, and that is the part that we can see or create. In this sense, we say that the entrepreneurial knowledge all human beings use throughout the social process is dispersed or divided into small parts. So there's a part in your mind, another in mine, another in mine, and so on. It is dispersed knowledge that cannot be centralized. Someone might claim it could be possible to invent a machine, a gigantic computer with a helmet attached to it by a cable, and we could put the helmet on the head of Vincent here and flip a switch and zap, everything he knows, bam, would be transferred to my brain. And then it would be your turn to wear the helmet, and one by one we'd put it on everyone, and we could suck out all the knowledge exclusive to each human being and transfer this knowledge to our gigantic machine, where we would centrally manage it. That is the socialist ideal sought by those who would attempt to manage society from above through coercive commands, and be successful at it. But it is a theoretically impossible ideal. This is precisely because the knowledge we are discussing cannot be expressed in words. It cannot be centralized or transferred to any machine, and besides, it is dispersed or divided. Each of us has, so to speak, a few bits or atoms, an infinitesimal part, and as we go along, we create this information according to our unique, exclusive view of the world. Dispersed knowledge, which is entrepreneurial knowledge, versus centralized knowledge, which is scientific or technical knowledge, engineering knowledge, the type used by engineers or by bureaucrats who want to centralize everything. So, what we must come to understand, the great wonder we must discover together this year, is how, since knowledge is dispersed, and the leading role in its creation is played by us, like little ants, each with an exclusive view of the world, it is possible for everything to come together in such a way that each of us can take advantage of the knowledge he or she lacks. In fact, the great contribution of economic science is that it explains how such a thing is possible, and that is what I am going to explain today. Today, I am wearing a Swiss watch. I know nothing about Swiss watches, but nevertheless, there is an enormous volume of practical information accumulated here regarding design, tradition, inner workings, etc. I am also wearing a suit made by a Madrid tailor, but the raw material came from Tunisia, and I am wearing a pair of shoes that were made, who knows, maybe in Italy or somewhere else. And though you cannot see them, I am wearing state-of-the-art bifocal contact lenses that I never have to take out, because they are 98% water. Do you realize the enormous volume of creative, entrepreneurial information I am benefiting from, tapping into, or using in those 4 examples alone without knowing anything about the items myself? And can you imagine the thousands upon thousands of human beings, little ants, who, by making their own small contributions of practical knowledge, have made it possible for me to wear my contact lenses, and for you to wear your glasses, and for you to wear your Swatch watch, and for you to write with that pencil, and for all of us to use the items that are part of our everyday lives. I am offering the most mundane examples, but we benefit from many thousands of goods and services. This is what we are going to learn this year. We will see how, without possessing this huge, constantly changing wealth of entrepreneurial knowledge that arises from the creativity of entrepreneurs, of each and every one of us when we act, we nevertheless benefit or take advantage of this knowledge. We will see what processes, or I was going to say mechanisms, but I do not like mechanistic terms, though we have no other in this case. We will see what processes make this possible. On many occasions, the behavior of human beings is contradictory. That is what I wish to show with the stick men I introduce on page 21 of the book. We could say these figures are part of a stick man analysis, an economic analysis using stick men. So, instead of filling up the blackboard with charts, mathematics and formulas, I fill it up with stick men. They are a simplified representation of ordinary human beings, like each and every one of us. Well, in the process of entrepreneurial creativity, we not only generate exclusive and dispersed entrepreneurial knowledge, but we also often generate contradictory actions. This happens when the actions of some people are incompatible or out of tune with those of other people. What we will see together this year is how the entrepreneurial social process of a free market economy permits us to take advantage of a huge volume of entrepreneurial creativity that is not at our disposal, but springs from other people. And we will see that this process is not only creative, but also coordinating. In other words, it tends to detect maladjusted behaviors and overcome maladjustments or discoordination by coordinating the behaviors. And this all happens spontaneously, without anyone's coercively bringing it about from above. I am explaining the essence of social science, the essence of the social phenomenon which is our object of study, and is also a surprising wonder. It is surprising that, without anyone's direction from above, spontaneously, creativity is stimulated, and maladjusted or discoordinated processes are coordinated. Many times, the dispersed knowledge we possess is maladjusted. That is what I am illustrating here. We will use this halo of short lines to represent the exclusive, practical, entrepreneurial knowledge of this man or woman, this human being, A, and here the practical knowledge of B. And we will suppose that in certain specific circumstances of time and place, that practical knowledge is that A intends to achieve an end, X, and the arrow that points to X indicates, in this diagram, the end pursued. As you know, the end is what motivates the actor to act. A is very upset because he realizes that to achieve the end X, he needs a resource, a means, R. Let us recall that we defined the means as anything the actor subjectively believes will enable him to accomplish his desired end. He values the end and assigns utility to the means, depending on the value of the end he believes the means will permit him to accomplish. Why is A upset? Because according to the knowledge he has at this moment, he cannot achieve the end X, because he lacks the resource R. So he cannot do it. He is frustrated. He cannot complete his action. Well, let us suppose that somewhere else in the market, and when I say somewhere else in the market, I am speaking in a praxeological sense. We mustn't be materialists. We mustn't think of geographical places. They could be right next to each other. I'll give you an example from the movies in a moment. Somewhere else, in a praxeological sense, in terms of human action, we find B, who is pursuing a completely different end. I have indicated it with an arrow that points down to the end Y. Furthermore, there is the following circumstance. Resource R is available to her in great abundance. She has a tremendous amount of it, but she attaches no importance to it, and she wastes it. She sees it like the curse of Texas. Do you know what the curse of Texas was? Well, before the discovery of the internal combustion engine, the main source of wealth in Texas was livestock. vast expanses of farmland where people raised cattle, many head of cattle. But it turns out there was a curse on Texas with respect to many parts of the United States, because from time to time, no one knew why, it was a mystery, a blackish, oily substance would ooze out of the ground into pools, namely oil. And if the cattle got close and the oil mixed with the water and the cattle drank the water, bam, the cattle would die. The poor stock breeders did not know what to do with it, except misuse it. Land was worth much less when that curse was upon it. In any case, they would light a match to it when they could, and poof, maybe it would go up in flames, and they could free themselves from the curse. One person misuses precisely the resource that in another praxeological place, another person urgently needs to accomplish a much valued end. When one person, depending upon his or her circumstances, misuses a resource that another person desperately needs, we say there is discoordination or a maladjustment. I could cite thousands of examples. For instance, there is a law on income from urban property, and this law prevents a free market in rentals. So there could be an elderly couple who live in Madrid's Salamanca district in a 500 square meter apartment with 20 rooms, 15 of which are always kept closed. And at the same time, there could be a newlywed couple with a child living in a cramped 40 square meter apartment in the Vicálvaro district. Some people misuse what other people desperately need, or perhaps we live near a river, and since the river is not private, and those who live upstream cannot sell their water, they do not appreciate it. They channel into the watering basin all they need for irrigation, and on top of that, they neglect it and waste it all. They have no incentive to save water. However, the Mercians who live downstream happen to need water like a spring shower, an appropriate expression, because they live in a very dry area. Some people waste what other people need. Or maybe I go to the movies feeling depressed because my girlfriend has left me. Oh, if I could only find the woman of my dreams, with such and such physical and spiritual characteristics, etc. I buy my ticket, and it turns out there is another girl who has those characteristics, because life is full of circumstances, and she buys a ticket and sits down next to me. The lights go down, and we both watch the movie. Just imagine, we are sitting right next to each other physically, but we may be light years away from each other in terms of praxeological human action. And when the movie is over, we may each go our own way and never meet. And yet we are perfect for each other. Or perhaps we do meet. We may have a chance encounter. That is why I say that it is not physical nearness that matters, but other places in a praxeological sense in terms of human action. As we will see, though I do not want us to get ahead of ourselves, the social process drives human creativity when we act, and gives rise to an inconceivable and constantly growing volume of new ideas about ends, means, etc. Ideas which move civilization forward, and which are only available to us in a tiny amount, and are exclusive, though we can still take advantage of this enormous volume of ideas as if we ourselves had created them, when we did not. Think of the examples of the watch, the suit, etc. Furthermore, we will see that whenever there is a maladjustment or social discoordination arises, there is also a very powerful incentive for the entrepreneurial act to uncover the maladjustment and achieve coordination.
Hay, además, que conectar esta idea del conocimiento tácito.
We need to connect this idea of tacit knowledge with the concept of institutions, which we talked about in an earlier class. We said that human beings have two tools to help us face the ineradicably uncertain future. First, our own entrepreneurial capacity, which tends to bring us closer to what we want to achieve. Our ends, though there is no guarantee. And second, institutions, which are repetitive, patterned behaviors we learn with practice, frameworks of behavioral guidelines. Well, the knowledge of institutions is also tacit, inarticulate knowledge.
Hay un ejemplo clarísimo.
There is a very clear example. I remember the first time I went to the United States. My wife had just completed a master's degree and she was working at a children's school. I used to pick her up from time to time, and I was surprised at how well the 3-year-old American children spoke English. But these 3-year-olds speak English 1,000 times better than I do. And I've spent hours and hours studying books, studying vocabulary, studying grammar, and I don't know even a tenth of what a child 3 or 4 years old knows. They conjugated verbs perfectly, just as a Spanish 4-year-old conjugates the most complicated subjunctives you can think of, and a 5-year-old knows even more than that. Try having a conversation with someone who has learned Spanish as a second language as an adult. He or she has learned it by studying technical knowledge, while a child learns a language by practice. From the time children are small, they hear language, and they see how it is used in interaction with their parents, their siblings, and their friends. Later, schools simply strengthen and refine what children already have. Language is basically tacit, inarticulate knowledge. In addition, the habits, traditions, and institutions that make up legal and moral standards, law, morality, are also practical, entrepreneurial, non-scientific knowledge, and we learn to follow them at a young age. They are instilled in us in our families and later in small, social community groups. Afterward, they may be reinforced by religious feelings, etc. We cannot articulate in scientific terms the specific role legal and moral standards play on a social level. And yet they play a vital role. We sense only the tip of the iceberg, but we have developed these pattern behaviors, and we know right from wrong. And we know that we come closer to achieving our ends if we adopt these pattern behaviors. Accounting is a language, and it enables entrepreneurs to assess whether they have made a profit or sustained a loss in the past, and to set a budget for the future. Nobody invented the Spanish language. It emerged as a result of an evolutionary process, and some would say it is a corruption of Latin. It is believed that the first forms of Castilian were used in the north of Burgos, and they took many generations, centuries to emerge. The same is true of accounting. The first instances of double-entry accounting were discovered in books found in Egypt, books dating from the Ptolemaic period. It was many centuries later that someone actually theorized about what had already tacitly evolved and taken shape. For example, in the sphere of accounting, there was a mathematician and Franciscan monk who taught mathematics to Leonardo da Vinci, Luca Pacioli. People say he discovered accounting. Not true. He theorized about it. He found out what entrepreneurs were doing, and he systematized it in his treatise on double-entry accounting, just as a treatise on linguistics systemizes what 3-year-old children already know, and so on. In any case, please note the tacit, inarticulate nature of the knowledge entrepreneurs generate, the importance of this knowledge, and also the fact that it provides the raw material for the most essential institutions, which make life in society possible. And this makes us quite dizzy, because it turns out that the institutions most crucial for us, language, legal standards, law, morality, etc., have not been created deliberately, nor can they be expressed in words. Instead, they are the result of an evolutionary process in which human beings manifest their nature through a successive change of countless entrepreneurial acts. There's an idea that God suddenly called out to Moses, and Moses went up the mountain, and God said, "Here, take these tablets." And Moses went back down with the commandments. "Okay, everybody, here are the commandments." This is a symbolic way of speaking, not a literal account. There is an evolutionary process that involves millions of human beings over generations and generations, thousands and thousands of years, in which we gradually discover, through entrepreneurship, which behaviors are successful and which are not. When something is already there, it is very easy to theorize about it. We could mention the sphere of money, Once it is there, it is very easy for the state to expropriate and manipulate it, and we will see the effects of such measures. They generate expansions and bubbles, and later financial crises and economic recessions. For when we insist on improving the spontaneous process of entrepreneurial creativity from above, we destroy it. That is another of the paradoxes we will learn about in this course. If we insist, in a rationalist manner, on creating our institutions ex novo, or on forcing the predominance of the knowledge that can be articulated in books over entrepreneurial knowledge, we destroy civilization. If I refuse to let anyone ride a bicycle unless he or she had first learned the formulas of mathematical physics, and unless a personal computer monitored everything, there would be no Tour de France. Nor would Indurain ever have appeared. Nor Beethoven, nor Schubert, nor Mother Teresa of Calcutta. If there is a purpose to the articulate knowledge we can acquire in elementary school, in high school, in college, in books, and through the effort we all make to come to class every day, this purpose is precisely to act as a sort of springboard, like at the swimming pool, for boosting our capacity for entrepreneurial creativity. In other words, a person who has a computer and articulate knowledge at his or her disposal has access to much more raw material that can stimulate his or her entrepreneurial creativity. Maps, charts and the like greatly increase our capacity to create tacit knowledge, and we know that tacit knowledge is different from scientific knowledge and also far more important or relevant. Let's say we're going to plan a trip for our next school break. We are going to go to Navarre on location. We could go blindly, or we could plan our trip a little with the help of scientific knowledge. So we go on the internet, and we see what routes there are, and we see what kinds of hotels there are, and whether they have 1, 2 or 3 stars. We request brochures and download a map, and with that information as a basis, we enhance our creative possibilities. Oh look, it says here on the map there's a convent or a monastery we could go visit. I hadn't thought of that. Serendipity. Well, let's go. Let's stop and see it. The scientific knowledge you gain here does not guarantee you anything once you get out into the real world. What it does provide you with is a technical grounding, which, if put to good entrepreneurial use, can boost your creativity. It gives you building blocks for your creativity, but it does not guarantee you anything. As a matter of fact, even without any of these building blocks, you can become a magnificent entrepreneur. I once knew an entrepreneur, the King of Light. I won't mention his name. He didn't know how to read or write. He was Spanish. With great difficulty, he learned to sign his name, and he used to try to look natural when he signed checks, etc. But he was a genius from the entrepreneurial standpoint. He had a clinical eye, a very sharp entrepreneurial eye for hiring collaborators, people far more learned than he, but he was the entrepreneur. It was clear. And he made it to the top without having hardly any of even the rudiments of scientific or technical knowledge. It is not necessary to go to college to achieve entrepreneurial success in life, in any sphere in which human beings can act. However, we must admit that if it is used well, the technical knowledge we acquire in the classroom can boost our capacity to create tacit, inarticulate knowledge in the future. On to the next characteristic of entrepreneurial knowledge. Such knowledge is essentially creative. As we will see, it has 2 facets, which are like 2 sides of the same coin, the creative facet and the coordinating facet. What do we mean when we say entrepreneurial knowledge is essentially creative? Well, I'll say it again. We're dealing with something astonishing and awe-inspiring. Indeed, today we will be discovering one amazing thing after another. For to exercise entrepreneurship, we do not need to have any means at our disposal. An act of entrepreneurship does not involve any cost at all. In this sense, entrepreneurship is especially creative. The very discovery of a profit opportunity involves an implicit profit. For example, it could be Mr. A who suddenly comes to a realization. Hey, Miss B is right there. She's very close by, and she has just what I need. Or it could be Miss B who says to herself, hey, I'm squandering this resource when Mr. A needs it. it could also be a third party. To help us visualize and illustrate the argument, let's suppose it is a third party, Mr. C. Let's suppose it is Mr. C or Ms. C, and that the entrepreneurial act simply consists of discovering, recognizing, or perceiving something that only a fraction of a second before had gone unnoticed, namely that there is a profit opportunity. We'll represent this discovery as a bulb that lights up. Eureka! Look at that! In my specific circumstances of time and place, and for whatever reason, I have realized that one person here is wasting resource R, which she throws out, while another person here needs it desperately. Right there, in that creative act, lies an implicit, pure entrepreneurial profit, and the exercise of creative entrepreneurship does not require us to have any means at our disposal. It only requires us to be alert, to have that sharp gaze that enables us to see what is going to happen. The other day we were saying that the etymological meanings of the Spanish words perspicaz and especulador, speculator, are associated both with sharp vision from a watchtower and with a person who keeps watch, to notice what is happening. As is logical, the entrepreneurial act is not just noticing something, we must also get to work. The entrepreneurial act is really very simple. Mr. C goes to Ms. B and says, "I'll buy your resource." And the day the woman hears that, she jumps for joy. So, this curse, I was willing to pay somebody to get this black muck off my land, and now it turns out I not only do not have to pay anyone, but someone's going to pay me. This is the happiest day of my life. And on top of that, this crazy guy, to be honest, I'm a little ashamed. This guy doesn't really know what he's doing. I guess it takes all kinds. He's going to pay me 3 monetary units. I feel bad for him. I almost have a guilt complex. I just give it to you. But the profit motive being what it is, if he pays me 3, well, I'll certainly take it. So Mr. C pays Ms. B 3 monetary units, and she hands over the resource. And then, what does Mr. C do? He goes to Mr. A and he says, "Look how sad you are. You can't achieve your end, X, because you don't have the resource. I've found it for you for 10. And Mr. A cries, "This is the happiest day of my life. I was willing to pay 100 for it. And this guy comes and sells it to me for 10? I feel almost guilty. I have a heavy heart, as if I were doing something wrong. Maybe I have committed a venial or mortal sin in not telling him I would pay him 200. Then Mr. C gives Mr. A resource R, which he bought from Ms. B, and Mr. A pays Mr. C the 10 monetary units. As a result, Mr. C has gained 10 minus 3, or 7 monetary units of pure entrepreneurial profit. Now you'll say, "Professor, what do you mean it's not necessary to have any means at one's disposal? Mr. C needs to pay 3 before he can sell." But he doesn't really need to have them, because the creative idea is enough. He can go to a third party and say, "Listen, I have a fantastic idea. Will you lend me 3 monetary units at 10% interest?" "At 10%? You're crazy. That's madness," etc. "For 1 day? That's usury." "No, really, lend it to me. In 1 day, I'm going to gain 7. The rest has to do with the concrete operation of the different action stages. But in the entrepreneurial discovery of the prior maladjustment, the pure entrepreneurial profit is already implicit. Just think how amazing that is. I've laid it all out for you. For in that entrepreneurial process by which exclusive and dispersed knowledge is created, in other words, the market process, which gives rise to the limitless advancement of civilization, any maladjustment or discoordination, like in the example we've discussed here in simple terms, emerges as a latent opportunity for profit, an opportunity waiting to be discovered by an entrepreneur, whether A, B, or a third party. Then all of the entrepreneurial impetus to obtain a profit sets us in motion to discover maladjustments and discoordination, contradictory behaviors, and coordinate them. This happens without any need for a ministry, an engineer, a prime minister, a bureaucrat, or a planner who insists on doing it. And so, this man who is so sad, we're going to wipe away his sadness. Like this. How does he feel now? Very happy. And how does she feel? Very happy. I will never forget, when I was studying for my MBA in the United States, I don't like to get up early. Every day I study until late at night, until 2 in the morning, and I get up late. Anyway, I had my first class of the day early in the morning, at 8:30, and I went like a zombie. My wife would drive me there in the car, and I was like a zombie, half asleep. We would head to the university. We lived relatively close, and we would stop at each traffic light. And we would stop right behind an annoying garbage truck driver who was collecting the garbage. And on the back of the garbage truck, written in English, there was a message that said, "The trash you throw away is our mainstay. Thank you very much." Early every morning, this man collected the trash nobody wanted, and it was his main source of income. Thank you very much. The curse of Texas. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
To sum up what we're discussing today, what I'd like to point out to you now is that every entrepreneurial act produces three extremely important, indeed vital effects. And these effects lie at the heart of the knowledge economics can provide about the market process. The three effects that result from the entrepreneurial act. First, the creation of information. Second, the transmission or communication of information. And third, coordination or adjustment. Before me, there have been other economists and schools that have focused on entrepreneurship, but always partially. For example, Joseph Alois Schumpeter. Schumpeter talks about the process of creative destruction in capitalism. He examines the process of creativity and sees it as a gale that is often destructive. This is a partial view, though in a sense it is a step forward with respect to the throng, the majority of economists who remain confined to their mathematical models in a frozen world of equilibrium adjustment, a world devoid of entrepreneurs. Another economist, a Nobel Prize winner named Douglas North, concentrates solely on the coordinating quality of the entrepreneurial act. Notice how I have described the three effects. First, creation, to which Schumpeter limits his incomplete analysis. Second, communication or transmission. And third, coordination. Creation and coordination, gale and order. Two sides of the same entrepreneurial coin. Let's consider each effect separately. We'll begin with the creation of information. Every act of entrepreneurship involves the creation from nothing, ex novo, ex nihilo, of information we had been unaware of until then. A fraction of a second earlier, we hadn't thought of the entrepreneurial project. The moment we think of it, new knowledge is created in our minds. And I can't tell you why, for such an explanation would be meta-economic. Maybe within the limits of psychology, a person could have some intuitions about it. Why is it that any of us, you or me, can create things? The other day I was saying that we use our recollections of the past as building blocks. We feel restless because in this part of our minds, though that's a rough way of putting it, we have this knowledge, and in this part we have this other knowledge, and we are restless and can't sleep until Eureka! We connect the two, and it occurs to us that we could do a certain thing. Why do we have this capacity? Theorists of computer science and artificial intelligence would say, well, it's like this. The human brain contains 150 billion neurons, approximately. It's like having several million personal computers connected in a network and working at the same time. Imagine that in one computer there is a certain bit of information which indicates that a particular thing could be done. And in another computer, X millions of computers away from the first one, imagine they're all connected in a horizontal line, there is another bit of information, and the two bits can be connected, and something of value results. Well, we don't know why we are able to create. Maybe we turn an idea over and over in our subconscious until we see the idea clearly. We can sense how the creation process works. The brain truly is a wondrous thing, and we can think of it in terms of computers, as a network of 150 billion neurons. But society is even more wondrous. According to Hayek, it is the most complex order in the universe because it consists of 7 billion people, each of whom has a brain with 150 billion neurons in it. Do you realize how much creativity that is? Beethoven's 9th Symphony, Schubert's 8th Symphony, The Unfinished, Dvorak's 8th Symphony, Las Meninas by Velázquez, Windows 95 by Bill Gates, Mother Teresa of Calcutta. In all areas, there is a surprising force of creativity. We create ex nihilo, from nothing, and I can't explain why. Why don't monkeys create in the same way? Or dogs? Well, the materialists, Though I don't want us to get ahead of ourselves, because we will discuss this when we talk about method a few lessons from now, the materialists believe the basic elements determine the spirit. I will show the opposite is true. The spirit determines the basic elements. We are unable to reproduce our own minds. It is beyond our capacity. We will talk about this when we study hierarchical orders. We have only sparks and intuitions. The strategy of computer scientists during a certain period in the last century was to build a super mainframe, a gigantic supercomputer. Come on, bigger, bigger, bigger! A truly gigantic computer, and that would be equivalent to a central planning agency. But it turns out they couldn't compete with a man who had a small personal computer that could be connected to another, and another, and another. Large computers organized hierarchically from above. Our minds are not made that way. They are decentralized and dispersed in nature. But it is not biology that comes to the aid of economics. It is economics that comes to the aid of biology and computer science by pointing out where creativity lies and what paths it takes. Every entrepreneurial act is especially creative. In fact, this is what I want to show with the light bulb. Eureka! I've got it! I'm sitting in a movie theater. Hey, that girl! Or the perfume. Or I make some silly little comment and she answers me. And it changes my life. I have made an entrepreneurial discovery. Or not. Maybe the light bulb doesn't go on for me and we both go our separate ways and an opportunity is lost. The entrepreneurial act is purely creative. This leads us to a brief theological and therefore meta-economic digression. I'm now going to take off my economist's hat and move into a completely different arena. Let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that there is a God, and that he created everything out of love. Those who have faith will see it more clearly than those who do not. But let's assume he exists. And let's assume, for the sake of argument, that God, who created everything, created us in his own image and likeness. What can it mean to say he created us in his own image and likeness? The essence of God, the supreme creator, is to create from nothing. Then what would be the bridge between God and man, who is but a short-lived little ant in history and extremely limited in physical and spiritual terms, though he has a point of connection with God? What in our nature resembles that of the Creator? What separates our nature from other natures, those of the animals, etc.? Ladies and gentlemen, the answer is obviously entrepreneurship. That innate capacity we have to create from nothing, discover new knowledge about ends and means. In this sense, and in line with what we are explaining, and now from outside the sphere of economics, the link between God and man would lie precisely in entrepreneurship. In fact, what would make human beings happy is precisely to act well. That is, to achieve the ends they set for themselves. However, this clearly requires a theory of ethics. What ends must I pursue? This is a meta-economic question. What ends must I pursue? In the final part of the course, we will connect science with ethics, and we will see that at least on a social level, the social process of cooperation requires a framework of justice. That is, a framework of behavioral guidelines that respect a person's right to freely reap the fruits of his or her own entrepreneurial creativity. In short, private property. Without respect for private property, the process of entrepreneurial creativity is frustrated. Nevertheless, though this respect is sufficient to fuel the process of social cooperation, it is not sufficient in every area within the human sphere. In addition, we need a theory of ethics, or a set of morals, to indicate to us which ends we must achieve. In any case, what gives satisfaction and happiness to a human being on earth is to exercise entrepreneurship well, achieve his or her ends, and pursue the ends he or she should achieve. And here, with this should, we must introduce, outside the sphere of economics, a whole body of moral standards. Incidentally, Pope St. John Paul II published an encyclical entitled Centesimus Annus, on the 100th anniversary of Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum. Centesimus Annus contains two sections, 44 and 45, I think, that seem as if they were dictated by Hayek. In other words, by one of the most eminent theorists of entrepreneurial knowledge, which is our topic. Notice what the former Pope writes. According to John Paul II, the decisive factor is man himself, that is, his capacity for knowledge in its two variants, scientific knowledge and practical knowledge. The author speaks of the network of knowledge and intercommunication, which makes up the market and society. He says the scarcest resource is man's entrepreneurial capacity for initiative and creativity. This view appears to be something very rare in the Catholic Church. The Church has gone ahead of the evolution of economic science. Instead of following behind, it has jumped ahead. Many of my colleagues remain anchored in the mathematical conception of social engineering and strictly scientific knowledge in the viewpoint of a social engineer. Now we come to the end of the meta-economic digression I wanted to make. I'll leave you to ponder the question, so, we are like God because we act entrepreneurially? And the answer is yes. But weren't entrepreneurs the bad guys? To attack entrepreneurs is to attack our most intimate nature. It's self-destructive. It's like infecting ourselves with a virus that destroys our immune system and eats away at us little by little. It's like attacking the profit motive, the search for profit. We fight against our own nature. I am simply articulating in scientific terms something that is clear to all of us, namely the essence of our own creative entrepreneurial nature. What sort of information is created? Well, in the case of Mr. C, the entrepreneur who discovers the profit opportunity latent in the maladjustment, it is the information that he can earn 7 monetary units by purchasing a resource which here is squandered and taking it there, where it is highly valued. Not only is this information created, but it is also transmitted or communicated in successive waves in the market. And we will see this together throughout the course. For when Mr. C comes into contact with Ms. B and buys her resource, he is transmitting new information to Ms. B, which alters her map of knowledge. What information does Ms. B acquire ex novo? Well, what do you know? It turns out this resource I thought was a curse is actually worth something. I was Ugly Betty, fat, knock-kneed, covered with pimples, etc. But it turns out I have a certain charm in some situations, and somebody has noticed me. That has changed my life, because it has changed my knowledge. What knowledge has been transmitted? Ms. B should save the resource she used to waste or misuse because it is in demand at a good price. Information is also transmitted to Mr. A. He was frustrated because he could not achieve his aspired end due to a lack of resource R, which he needed to accomplish this end he so desired. Now he receives the information that the resource is available, that he can go on with his project and complete that stage. And completing that stage is not only an end in itself, it also opens the horizons for many other ends that will occur to him afterward. So, the creation of information from nothing, the entrepreneurial act. The moment the entrepreneur recognizes a profit opportunity, information he or she lacked a fraction of a second earlier emerges in his or her mind. The entrepreneur has created something. When Mr. C, for instance, acts entrepreneurially, he transmits part of that information to those involved in the entrepreneurial act. Specifically, Ms. B. He communicates to her that she should save the resource she was wasting, as it is in demand at a good price. There are people who need it, and Mr. A can complete his action, because that resource is available. He can go forward with his life projects. Indeed, according to my definition, when we transmit something to someone, we cause that person to generate in her mind information she did not have before, information we had at least partially discovered or created ourselves. When I say I am now transmitting knowledge to you, you must not interpret that in physical terms. It's not as if I had a kind of tube here which I could just connect up and fill your minds with knowledge. No, instead, I am giving you a stimulus that encourages your creativity. You are practicing economic science yourselves. Though it is true that I am directing you, stimulating you, guiding you, you yourselves are creating and discovering knowledge, and you should be very proud of that. When we transmit something to someone, we enable that person to create or discover information which, in part, we have already discovered ourselves. Here you are, acquiring knowledge, but each of you is acquiring it in his or her own way. You are listening to me, and each of you is applying my words differently, as you immediately and almost inevitably try to adapt them to your own life circumstances, and enrich the seed you are creating. Notice we lack terms to describe such abstract realities. I have transmitted this seed to you, and you will take it with you, and it will continue to germinate. And tonight, as you sleep, it will sink in further. Your subconscious will kick in, and tomorrow you will be different people. Thanks to me? No, thanks to you, because you are creating something through listening to me. That is the transmission or the communication of information. The same is true for audio-visual communication. You are simply using a specific medium. Of course, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But the knowledge you are transmitting is essentially subjective and practical. It is entrepreneurial and inarticulate, and it suggests things and awakens feelings and emotions. There lies the difference between a great film director or a great screenwriter and a blockhead whose only interest is putting a hand into the coffer and receiving state subsidies. However, not only is information created and transmitted, but there is something even more remarkable. The entrepreneurial act is coordinating. It coordinates. For once it is performed, people who previously acted with no awareness of each other in a discoordinated manner, the person who squandered water upstream on a river when someone downstream needed it, the person who expected to remain single forever and so didn't take care of herself when there was someone who could have been very happy at her side, the person who thought garbage was a curse, the trash you throw away is our mainstay, when if properly treated, some waste can be turned into fertilizer, or the curse of Texas, oil, when, if processed at a refinery, it becomes gasoline and makes the internal combustion engine possible. These situations arise in all areas of life. Two people who used to perform their actions with no awareness of each other, in a maladjusted, discoordinated manner, learn. They learn, and in the best way possible, that is, motu proprio, of their own volition. They do not learn because they are commanded from above to attend classes at certain times, but because they realize learning is in their best interest. They each learn to discipline their behavior. And do you know what disciplining your behavior means? It means tightening your belt. And I'm going to tighten my belt, if I have another hole left for the buckle. We learn to discipline our behavior. To sacrifice and to make an effort in connection with another person. And we learn to do so in the best way possible to learn, spontaneously, with the idea that we will then better achieve our goals. And that is what makes life in society possible. From the time we get up in the morning and at 6 a.m. somebody has left milk for us, do you think it's enjoyable to get up at 4 in the morning to bring us our newspaper and our milk? Do you think it's pleasant to change the diaper of someone who is ill or elderly, or to collect the garbage, etc.? And yet we do these things happily, because we each learn to discipline our behavior in terms of the needs of others. We do so without anyone's commanding us, without reading it in the official state gazette, without the direction of a public official, but simply in our pursuit of entrepreneurial profit. When we discipline our behavior and save something we find unpleasant, and do so happily because we're going to sell it at a good price, we are acting in tune with the needs of others we may not even know, and that is the most amazing thing of all. We may never meet them. I will never meet the person who made my watch, nor the one who made my shoes, nor the one who enables me to see with my contact lenses. There is merit in helping our neighbor, but it is relative because our neighbor is near us. And if he starts to cry, almost everyone will feel his heart soften and hand him a little money. What really has merit is to help millions of people you have never met and will never meet. People in another part of the universe. And that is what we do every day in the capitalist process of the globalized world. A process driven by entrepreneurship. The act of coordination or adjustment, all maladjusted behavior, whenever a human being acts without an awareness of or against the interests of others, This maladjustment takes the form of a profit opportunity, which remains latent to be discovered by an army of entrepreneurs, each and every one of us. This discovery can be made by the people involved or by a third party, who, the moment he or she notices the profit opportunity and acts to take advantage of it, triggers the effects of the creation of information, the transmission of information, and coordination or adjustment. A little later, we will take another step and explain that in the majority of entrepreneurial acts, this do ut des, this exchange, is expressed as a price in monetary units. We will explain that the information embodied in prices is transmitted in successive waves, so to speak, throughout the entire market, and it permits the multilateral coordination of millions of people. A simple price transmits, in a highly compressed form, a huge volume of practical knowledge, which facilitates the coordination of all human beings. Let's imagine there is a forest fire in Brazil, and as a result, the world's stock of wood decreases, and in turn, the price of wood increases. Without our being aware of what has happened, without our knowing about the fire, nor its causes, we will all discipline our behavior, and instead of buying a wooden pencil, we will buy a plastic one, etc. Everyone will tune his or her behavior to the new circumstances. Furthermore, we will see that in the face of global warming, etc., the spontaneous market process alone can offer a solution to all the problems and challenges which arise. The spontaneous market process, and not organization, planning, or social engineering from above. Now for the third characteristic of entrepreneurial knowledge. Entrepreneurial knowledge is tacit and inarticulate. What does this mean? It means that entrepreneurial action teaches us how to perform certain actions. It shows us how to acquire practical habits of behavior, what English speakers call know-how. So, we set out to gain some know-how, and there is a learning curve, and we need practice. We are developing habits of conduct, know-how. But we do not come to know exactly, in scientific or technical terms, the elements of our knowledge, how they relate to each other, nor the foundations they rest on. Knowledge of facts like these is called know-that, and we could give many examples of know-how. For instance, I remember how I learned to ride a bicycle. I will never forget it. I was small, 4 or 5 years old. It was in El Escorial. Not San Lorenzo, but El Escorial de Ebayo. My parents had a house in a residential area called Prado Tornero. At any rate, they bought my sister a girl's bike. Back then, there used to be girls' bikes and boys' bikes. For some mysterious reason, boys' bikes used to have a horizontal bar that was very uncomfortable, especially if you fell onto it. However, girls' bikes had a curved frame, supposedly to make room for their skirts. Girls' bikes were much more comfortable. Anyway, I wanted to learn to ride a bike. How do you think I learned to ride a bike? You must be one of those who fell onto the bar, am I right? Okay. So, how did I learn to ride a bike? Did my father buy me a manual? Did I say to him, "Get me a manual on how to ride a bike"? Did I study the manual? No one has ever learned to ride a bike that way. What I did was, I boldly got on my sister's bike, once they had taken off the training wheels, and I tried to ride down a hill. And you know what happened? I took a terrible fall. I skinned my leg up to my knee and went home crying, "Ow, mummy, mummy!" Well, for a while I stayed away from the bicycle, but my goal was to learn, because I wanted to know how to ride a bike, like the big kids. And so I pointed the bike down the hill again and again and again, until somehow, mysteriously, I managed to keep my balance and not fall. In other words, I developed the practical habit of entrepreneurial conduct that enabled me to ride a bicycle. How many times did Miguel Indurain win the Tour de France? 5. Do you think Indurain knows the formulas of mathematical physics that permit him to keep his balance and not fall? That is, does he know the precise angle at which he needs to lean the bike, so that in a curve, the centrifugal force will keep him stuck to the ground and he won't fall? And does he enter these formulas into a computer, along with the specific data of bicycle weight and speed, the wind that day, etc.? And does the computer then automatically calculate the results and send them to the bike, so that the automatic pilot can... No. What Indurain has developed is practical knowledge on how to ride a bicycle. He has tacit knowledge. It's like when you know something, but you don't know how you know it. It's like when a young woman, Any of my students, perhaps, goes to buy a dress. My daughters go to Zara. They tell me, "Dad, Zara has all the latest fashions, and the clothes are cheap, so I can buy them and get rid of them." And they are always at Zara. Zara is everywhere. In Vienna, there is a huge Zara store. And in Bratislava, at the Zara store, it comes to blows, people fighting over the dresses. Quite a curious phenomenon, Zara. The other day, the CEO of El Corte Inglés said to me, very sadly, they've stolen 200 billion of the former pesetas from us in sales. They haven't stolen the money. They are satisfying the desires of consumers better than anybody. Would it be possible to perfectly articulate some knowledge and put it into a book called Treatise on the Clothing That Looks Good on Me? No. When you go shopping, you rely on your know-how, your intuition. This looks good on me, but I can't see myself in that. It looks bad on me. But if someone asked you, can you tell me precisely why it looks good or bad on you, what the logical reasons are, you might be able to say, well, it makes me look really short, or it makes my butt look big, or it's too tight. The fact is, you know, or think you know, what looks good, and that is practical knowledge. The fashion industry always works that way, and the companies that offer the different styles use the trial and error method. Some items are successful, and others are not, but there is no manual, because entrepreneurial knowledge is not scientific knowledge, it is tacit knowledge. In the book, I give the example of golf. Why? Well, every Sunday I play golf. I am a terrible golfer. At the beginning of the season, I start out playing relatively well, and with each passing Sunday, my game gets worse. By the time the season ends in July, I am hopeless. Golf is a game that was invented by the English, and therefore it is unnatural. The English are a wacky people. You have to grip the club in a very counterintuitive way. The dominant arm is the left arm. You can't move your head during the backswing, because if you do, you won't hit the ball. You have to pull your arms back until right where your chin touches this shoulder, and then you have to come down like this with your left arm, but without moving your body, because if you move it, and then your first impulse is to look to see where the ball goes. But if you look to see where the ball goes, you botch it, because then you won't hit the ball. You have to stay there like this, without looking where the ball goes. In short, it's an English thing. And no matter how many books and treatises you read about this English thing, the only way to learn how to do it is to stand there swinging like a schmuck, like I do. And when you've swung the club 1,000 times, you say to yourself, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. And that's when you start to get the hang of it. You develop a habit, and you start hitting the ball, hopefully. That's what we hope for, but it can be pretty complicated. Practical habits of conduct. As I have mentioned in class, human relationships are also practical habits of conduct. In relationships, we learn by doing, and each person must adapt these habits to his or her own circumstances. The best way to attract a girl or a guy is not the same for everyone. What works for one person and guarantees his or her success does not necessarily guarantee the success of someone else. As I have said, we are all worlds unto ourselves, and each of us is unrepeatable. If I see that a guy is very successful, and I try to copy his behavior exactly, I may fail miserably. I may be the laughing stock of all the girls and not say a word to them, and vice versa. Why? Because only by developing tacit, inarticulate knowledge, which comes from taking a chance again and again in specific circumstances of time and place, can I develop my entrepreneurial creativity. The same is true for getting a particular enterprise off the ground in the business or commercial sphere, and for helping our neighbors in need, and for acting in the areas of philanthropy and religion. There are thousands of different ways of doing things, even within the sphere of a particular religion. Suddenly, someone has a vision. He says, let's form the order of preachers. We'll go out and preach in twos. And so it was. St. Dominic, the Dominicans, and another order, the Franciscans, and another. But what is this? This is anarchy. Each person forms whatever religious order he wants. There was another man, one who was sought by the Inquisition and briefly thrown in jail. Afterwards, he went to Paris, a great paranoiac, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuits, who are organized like an army and place themselves at the Pope's disposal for whatever he might want them to do. And what is the reason for this? What do these people have to do with the others? What is the relationship between them? And then suddenly another man appeared, Monsignor Escrivá de Balaguer, and once he had been canonized, and the Opus Dei seemed very successful, yet another man came on the scene. He was playing the guitar, and his name is Kiko Argello. What is this? Well, everyone has his or her own view of the world, and in the end, though it appears a mess, as long as a basic structure of principles is accepted and maintained, time will tell. It's a sort of free market. Maybe what is successful in certain historical circumstances of time and place is not so necessary in others, but we don't know. Maybe what stands the test of time is what prevails. Life is beautiful, precisely because it is extraordinarily rich in entrepreneurial creativity, and therefore complex. Together, we're going to ponder the differences that exist or should exist between the methods of study in social science, economic science, the science in which we are the subjects, and the methods of study in the natural sciences, physics, chemistry, etc., in which the objects of research are inanimate entities, that is, they have no soul, from the outside world. To begin our exploration of the topic, let us consider the Hayek Hypothesis. As you know, Friedrich Hayek, winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1974, was perhaps Mises's most brilliant disciple. Hayek, in his book The Sensory Order, proposes a hypothesis which we will call, take note, the Hayek hypothesis on the hierarchical classifications of orders of phenomena according to their degree of complexity. To better illustrate and explain the Hayek hypothesis, I'm going to introduce this triangle, this inverted pyramid, which is divided according to degree of complexity. The vertex at the bottom, you see, degree of complexity, refers to phenomena which are relatively less complex, thus the minus sign, relatively less complex phenomena. As we move up the triangle, we come to relatively more complex phenomena. The narrow vertex indicates that the phenomena or orders studied have a lower degree of complexity, and the inverted base at the top indicates that as we move upward, the phenomena progressively increase in complexity. To the right, we note the different sciences according to their object of research. There we see that physics focuses on phenomena that are relatively simpler in terms of their degree of complexity. Another science examines phenomena similar to those studied in physics, but with a somewhat higher degree of complexity. It is the science that studies chemical phenomena, chemistry, because now there are reactions. These reactions take place between different chemical compounds and give rise to different molecules, etc. We could even make a leap in the degree of complexity and analyze different organs. For example, a human or bovine liver or a brain, from the viewpoint of a biologist, as objects of study or research in biology. Biology examines much more complex phenomena, but it rests on chemistry and physics. The elements are now cells, which result in certain organs or organisms, but we can and do analyze them, though with greater difficulty, because they are more complex. We rely on the sciences further down in the triangle, like chemistry and physics, because they focus on relatively simpler phenomena. Now we take a qualitative leap and begin to study phenomena that are far more complex. The phenomena we have considered up to now, the ones which I have mentioned and which physics, chemistry, biology and the natural sciences in general focus on, we will refer to as World 1 phenomena, so that we understand among ourselves that we are referring to the relatively simpler phenomena, though they are of varying degrees of complexity, which natural scientists study. But now we take a qualitative leap past the up arrow and we begin to study much more complex phenomena. In fact, Hayek tells us that the spontaneous market order, or if you prefer, society, is the most complex order that exists in the universe. The foundation is human action, which we have been studying together, with its different components, and the exercise of creative entrepreneurship by all of the people who make up humanity and who interact among themselves and thus give rise to society. Society is an extremely complex network of human interactions. We defined it the other day. Such interactions basically consist of exchange relationships fueled by the creativity of entrepreneurship, which constantly creates, transmits, and coordinates. It creates and transmits information. It coordinates the maladjusted behavior of human beings, and it does so in a competitive manner. All of this results in the boundless multiplication of life, understood as an ever greater number of human beings who enjoy an ever higher quality of life. That limitless expansion, the social Big Bang I was telling you about, well, the study of those phenomena would pertain to World 2. It is possible to imagine even more complex orders. We'll leave the possibility of them open, but we won't discuss them now. Still, we can imagine the existence of an order that is much more complex than the most complex order we can conceive of, which is that of society. I have called this higher order the supreme order. You can label it God if you want to. In any case, it is the order of a world that is far beyond us. We'll call it World 3, and leave it at that hypothetical description. At this point, now that we have introduced our diagram, we are ready to consider the hypothesis Hayek proposes in his book, The Sensory Order. Hayek says the following. Take note. He says that an order can come to understand, to comprehend, to explain, to account for, if you will, orders that are simpler or less complex than itself. But it can never explain nor account for itself. Nor can it explain or account for orders more complex than itself. What reason does Hayek give for this idea? He says that each order is like a network or structure of elements and categories. We've all been children. Think of a Meccano set. Do you remember building with a Meccano set? We built structures. Well, Hayek says that into a structure, a set of related elements and categories, we can integrate or include and also understand a simpler Meccano building. That is, a structure or order with fewer categories and less complex relationships between them than is true of the order we start with. However, what we cannot even conceive of is an order which, with its particular degree of complexity, includes and accounts for itself and its own complexity. Nor can we imagine an order which includes and accounts for orders more complex than itself. Let's apply this Hayekian idea to the pyramid. An understanding of chemistry requires a science. Physics that focuses on simpler orders. And biology relies on both chemistry and physics. Hayek says that it is inconceivable for physics, which lies at the narrow vertex and studies relatively less complex phenomena, to account for and make clear the more complicated phenomena of biology. Instead, the reverse is true. Biology, which focuses on more complex phenomena, includes or incorporates physical and chemical phenomena. Now we come to the creative human mind, to the intelligence of human beings. As a phenomenon, I place the human mind very close to human action, as we have seen. Well, the human mind can account for and study physics. And indeed, every year a Nobel Prize in Physics is awarded, and physics is advancing. Chemistry is as well, though somewhat more awkwardly. Biology and medicine are moving forward too, but they face many more obstacles. Medicine is not such an exact science as chemistry, which lends itself to laboratory experiments involving reactions. We know for sure that if 2 atoms of hydrogen bond with 1 atom of oxygen, the result is H2O, a molecule of water. In medicine, we may know, for instance, that of every 1,000 tumors with certain characteristics, 80% resolve, but now we are dealing with a much more complex order. Still, we can, with our minds, account for biological phenomena. And we can, with our minds, understand something about human action and society, though with far greater difficulty, because these are immensely more complex phenomena. And we can develop a discipline, economic science, which we are studying together. This is a much more difficult undertaking, however. It is much harder to practice economic science than to study physics, chemistry, or biology, despite appearances. At any rate, the human mind cannot account for itself nor replicate itself. The human mind can, for instance, under certain circumstances, induce nuclear fusion, or chemical reactions, or perform a liver transplant. But the human mind cannot replicate itself. According to Hayek's hypothesis, an order cannot fully explain itself, nor account for itself, nor replicate itself. It is interesting to note the important implications of Hayek's idea. It would mean that the entire scientific program of artificial intelligence, that is, the attempt to replicate the mind of a human being, is doomed to failure. In other words, artificial intelligence is a pompous term. I suppose we could advance by inventing a very fast calculator or a computer that calculates at the speed of light, but those are really just dumb machines, if you will. They merely reproduce certain mechanical behaviors, depending on how the machines have been programmed. Perhaps we could place such a machine inside a robot and give an anthropomorphic impression that there is a human being there, but there really isn't one. What I'm trying to say is that it is a mystery how we create with our minds and why we create. And we are not able to create ourselves, to make creative human beings, according to the Hayek hypothesis. Furthermore, we are most certainly not able, with our minds, to account for orders of a higher degree of complexity than our own minds. In Hayek's view, our minds can be described as extraordinarily complex structures of related elements and conceptual categories. Our minds are sustained by 150 billion neurons, but that is the biological description. In reality, how these neurons function, how they receive information, how they create, I have given you some intuitions, but they are very timid. I offered a very rough explanation as follows. In a certain part of our brains, in certain neurons, there lies a particular memory or bit of information from the past, and in another part there lies another, and it turns out that by combining them, we may get the idea for a project. We may create something new, something no one had ever thought of before. I am putting forward a tentative, awkward explanation, but it is not possible for me to provide a clearer one, because my mind cannot explain nor account for itself. For we know an order cannot account for itself, nor for another order of an equal degree, let alone a higher or much higher degree of complexity. The fact that we can't understand or comprehend anything about orders more complex than our own minds leads many people to assume that nothing exists beyond our minds, beyond what we can comprehend. However, I find this stance extremely reckless, because the first obligation of a scientist or any human being is to humbly acknowledge the limits of his or her own mind. In other words, to admit that people are very limited. To do this, we must allow for the possible existence of orders so complex that we do not understand them. And on a practical level, it is as if they do not exist. So, I find it reckless to claim that the world ends here, and that there are no orders more complex than the ones we can grasp with our little minds. A true scientist should be modest and leave open the possibility. He or she should say, well, I recognize my limitations, and that according to this Hayekian hypothesis, I can't understand anything more complex than my own mind. But I allow for the possible existence of orders or phenomena which have a higher degree of complexity and are beyond my understanding. The second step would be to ask you the following question. Does this mean we cannot come to know, I don't mean comprehend, understand, explain or account for, but know, anything about orders more complex than our minds? Well, there is a possible way for us to come to know something. Certainly we must acknowledge that we cannot understand or comprehend, etc., but there is a possible way. What is it? Well, we know we can't understand. We recognize that from the outset. But how can we come to know something? There is only one possible way. A little bird could come and tell us. We must leave that possibility open too. We can call it revelation. Someone reveals something to us or tells us something. Of course, the problem with a little bird coming and telling us something, or revealing it to us, is that we can't understand anything about an order that exceeds our own minds in complexity. So we have to believe. Notice what I am saying. I am saying that with our degree of conceptual complexity, we cannot account for nor understand any order more complex than our own. It's as if we were blind. Also, I am saying that any modest scientist must acknowledge the limits of his or her own mind, and must not adamantly declare, nothing exists but what I can understand. At least a humble scientist should say, I am open to the hypothesis that there are orders of such a degree of complexity that I cannot understand them. There is a further step, and many people take it based on belief. The belief that we can come to know something if it is revealed to us from outside and we accept that it is true. In other words, we make an act of faith. Then we can come to know something. A person might say, listen, the Holy Trinity, there's just no understanding that. True, but it's been revealed to us. And furthermore, I believe it. It can't be verified nor scientifically proven. In fact, no one can prove that it is false, nor that it is true. For it exceeds in complexity the sole instrument human beings depend on in our action and our lives, our own minds. I'll conclude by pointing out the main implications of the Hayek hypothesis. In what direction do relationships flow between the different orders? From the bottom up or from the top down? Many scientists think relationships flow from the bottom up. That is, they think physical and chemical reactions are the determining force in the world. These scientists are determinists or materialists. In a nutshell, today I went to a movie which made a certain impression on me. I then had a Coke which triggered certain physical reactions, and with that my behavior is predetermined, though we don't know how. Materialists hold that the simplest orders determine, from the bottom up, everything in the cosmos around us. In other words, cells and atoms are what led Beethoven to compose his Ninth Symphony. According to the Hayek hypothesis, this is nonsense. A simple order cannot account for more complex orders. Relationships must always flow from the top down. That is, complex orders explain, determine, understand, create, if you will, relatively simpler orders. However, we need only scratch the surface or think a little to discover that materialistic, deterministic ideology makes no sense, even if it is the one most scientists accept. If all of my creative behavior is actually determined by stimuli from the outside world, from the simplest orders, which is what determinists and materialists maintain, that's why they're called materialists, matter would determine spirit, instead of spirit determining matter. If, as materialists claim, the simpler orders determine the complex spiritual orders, then matter determines spirit. All my behavior, my being here, your reactions, all of this will be the result of chemical reactions in the brain and external stimuli. That's what they say. But let us apply materialistic determinism to materialistic determinism. Now we see, Mr. Materialistic Determinist, that your very idea, materialistic determinism, is also determined by external stimuli. And provided you wish to have a coherent viewpoint, you must see that if your idea that everything is determined by external stimuli is itself determined by external stimuli, then it lacks all foundation. It is simply the result of a chemical reaction of atoms. No, listen. I say external stimuli determine everything except my idea, which occurred to me and is creative, etc. The fact is, dear students, this is absurd, for it is not even possible to conceive of a world devoid of what classical philosophers called free will. Materialistic determinism does away with free will. It implies that everything we are doing, all of our behavior, and all human creativity, etc., is predetermined by certain chemical reactions and external stimuli. We cannot conceive of such a world. Our world is one of creativity, of ideas that occur to us and that we hadn't thought of before, ideas that might emerge or might not emerge. It is a spiritual world. Besides the fact that by its own standard, a deterministic world makes no philosophical sense, it is a world in which there would be no free will, and it is an unimaginable world. It is a world in which mankind is superfluous. It is a world of robotic beings and penguins, and that is precisely what most of my colleagues study when they insist on applying mathematics and the static view to economics. That is why, though it seems very abstract, the method is so attractive and also so challenging and so important. A world of robotic beings and penguins is a static world in which an increase in the population is counterproductive, since everything is given, and thus, the more penguins there are, the less each penguin gets. There are the same number of fish, and if there are many penguins, then each gets fewer fish, and the penguins go hungry. Materialistic determinism, the idea that the lower phenomena determine the higher phenomena, leads to the static view. It leads to Malthusianism. It leads to the notion that human beings are like rats, and the fewer there are, the better, etc. The approach of Hayek and Mises, that economics is a science of the spirit, of creative ideas, and that complex phenomena account for simple ones and not vice versa, in other words, relationships flow from the top down, leads to the dynamic view of the market. It leads to the idea that the central role belongs to creative human beings, endowed with a great creative capacity to discover new ends and means, and to the idea that the restrictions of the outside world are not given by the objective elements physicists study, but instead that the outside world changes every day as a result of entrepreneurial creativity. So, apart from the more or less theological digression we have made, that it seems anti-scientific to adamantly believe nothing can exist beyond our own minds, especially since we have the obligation to be modest and acknowledge the limitations on our minds, we must leave open the possibility that more complex orders exist. To better understand the essential methodological differences between the world of the natural sciences and that of the social sciences, let's outline these differences by contrasting the two worlds. Point number 1. The natural sciences study relatively simple phenomena, while the sciences of human action study relatively complex, or if you will, enormously complex phenomena. I repeat, the first point that distinguishes a natural scientist, a physicist, chemist, biologist or doctor, from an economist is that the physicist, chemist, biologist or doctor studies relatively simple phenomena, while we social scientists study enormously complex phenomena.
Científicos sociales estudiamos fenómenos complejísimos.
Oh, come on. What is Professor Huerta de Soto saying? Everybody knows physicists study the most complicated stuff. Don't they study black holes? Quarks? To me, that seems a lot more complicated than studying society. I mean, in the end, society? Pfft, anybody can talk about that. Politicians like Zapatero come and tell us what needs to be done. Raise wages, lower taxes. And the governor of the Bank of Spain says we need to increase the money supply. Anybody can talk about society, even a nobody, but you've got to study a lot to be a physicist. Despite appearances, the truth is quite the other way round. In fact, the phenomena of the social sciences are so complex that no one understands them, and therefore even the most ignorant people venture their opinion. Nobody dares offer an opinion on, say, nuclear fission without being an expert in atomic physics. Oh man, I better watch my step. I know nothing about this. Or on the body's reaction to chemotherapy. No, without having studied this, I'd better keep quiet. But everyone sounds off on what should be done regarding wages, the right to hire and fire, aid to the developing world, etc., when social phenomena are actually much more complex than those of the world of physics, or astronomy, or chemistry, or medicine. Precisely because they are more complex, we understand only a tiny fraction of them, and that is why the vast majority of people venture their opinion, for they are not even aware of what they don't know. However, the phenomena of the world of economics are far more complex than those of the world of physics. In economics, the concepts and categories are infinitely more complicated. Just think, there are 7 billion human beings, and they are all interacting with each other creatively. They are generating new knowledge that did not exist before, whereas no atom, no dwarf star, no supernova is creating, discovering or composing symphonies, nor writing a new television script, nor even possibly devising an operating system like Windows 95, etc. I repeat, according to Hayek, by far the most complex order in the universe is the spontaneous market order or process. However, and I'll say it again, the great paradox lies in the fact that because human beings understand very little about the market process, they boldly voice their opinions and pontificate without knowing anything. Imagine the damage they could do that way. They could even destroy civilization. Let's move on to point number 2 of contrast. In the natural sciences, things, res in Latin, are the object of study.
Cosas, como por ejemplo, ¿qué? ¿Qué cosas?
Things. But what things, for example? A rock? A plant? A gallbladder?
Vesícula biliar. Cosas.
Things.
En cambio, vamos a ver punto número 2 a la derecha.
Now, point number 2 from the other perspective. In the social sciences, things are not the object of research or study. In the social sciences, ideas, and here write ideas in capital letters and underline it, are the object of study. The ideas human beings have about their ends and means.
Sobre sus fines y sus medios.
This is the fundamental difference between the world of the natural sciences and the world of the social sciences. In the natural sciences, we are always performing lab experiments, watching and analyzing the reactions of things external to us. In the social sciences, what we research are ideas that other people hold about what they do, that is, about their ends and their means. In his book, The Counter-Revolution of Science, Hayek offers the following example. He tells us that a cosmetic is not a cosmetic due to its chemical content, in other words, what's in the little jar from a chemical standpoint, but due to a belief certain human beings, men and women, hold that if they apply that particular cream every night, they'll wake up more attractive the next morning. Such a belief, held by one person, is sufficient to turn the cream into a cosmetic. In economics, it is not the chemical content of something that assigns it to the conceptual category of cosmetic. Instead, it is the ideas others have about that chemical content, the belief that it will enable them to achieve a certain end. The example I offer every year, I did it the other day in Poland and it caused quite an uproar, illustrates this perfectly. When I rip up the bill and we all feel our hearts sink, it is not the physical and chemical content of the bill, the cellulose and ink, that makes us feel that way. We feel that way because every one of us sees that bill as a means to achieve things of value. And we need the bill because it would enable one person to have lunch, another to get home, and another to make it to the end of the month, etc. And when I rip it up, that is precisely what I want to illustrate, that our hearts have sunk because of the ideas we have about the ends we could each satisfy with 10 euros. We say to ourselves, "What is the professor doing? He's destroying something I need." Nevertheless, I am achieving something very important, and that is to emphasize that you are giving economic status to the bill, not because of its content of cellulose and ink, but because of your ideas, which are always spiritual, about the ends you could satisfy with that bill. Therefore, economics deals with the ideas other human beings have about what they do, their ends and their means, while the natural sciences deal with external things from the outside world.
Punto número 3. Las cosas que estudian los científicos naturales.
Point number 3. The things natural scientists study are directly observable in the outside world. So, with more or less difficulty, we can observe a rock, a chemical compound, or a molecule, or a galaxy. Consider the universe. We look out and we see the night sky packed with stars. But if we get closer with a more powerful telescope, we discover that half of them are galaxies, like the Milky Way, which has 150 billion stars. Do you realize where we are in all of this? How small we are? We can observe those phenomena, those things in the outside world. We do so in a laboratory, or we dissect a cadaver, or we analyze a plant. Things in the outside world, which are the object of research in the natural sciences, are directly observable, with more or less difficulty. We may have to use an extraordinarily powerful telescope, or a laboratory experiment, or a linear accelerator, like the one inaugurated not too long ago in Switzerland. A machine for making two particles collide and observing the effect on antimatter. But these things are directly observable in the outside world, whereas, I ask you, has anyone ever seen an idea? Let's see, an idea. Hey, there's one now. I'm going to catch it. Oh no, the idea's getting away. Has anyone ever seen an idea? Ideas, which are the object of research in the social sciences, cannot be observed in the outside world.
Tan solo cabe interpretarlas.
They can only be interpreted in their historical context, in their particular historical and geographical circumstances. And we must have a prior theory that permits us to interpret them. In fact, all of the effort a social scientist makes from the perspective of a historian, we will talk more about history today and in the next class on method, consists of interpreting ideas which are not directly observable, but which can be interpreted in view of prior theoretical knowledge.
Vamos a ver, supongamos un acto de compraventa.
Let's see. Let's imagine a sales transaction. We go into a pharmacy to buy a cosmetic, and let's imagine that for the first time some newly arrived aliens are observing that act. They've just arrived at the speed of light, and by some procedure they are watching the transaction. They know nothing about mankind, nor do they have any prior knowledge. So what do they register? Well, they take the approach of a natural scientist and register what they can see, observable entities in the outside world. They say, there goes a carbon-based life form. It's in motion, and now it's moving a frame composed of plastic and glass, and a ding-dong has sounded. We don't know what that is, a sort of bell, and the life form is going up to another plastic frame. How very strange. Now a second carbon-based life form is coming out, and it starts to produce guttural sounds, and the first answers it with guttural sounds. The second moves back and extracts a glass jar with a highly complex chemical compound inside, which we've analyzed from above, and gives it to the first life form. And this is the strangest part of all. The first carbon-based life form hands over a piece of cellulose with ink on it and leaves. It moves away in another direction. The aliens haven't understood a thing. They've observed the scene, that is, what was directly observable from the outside, from the perspective of a natural scientist, but they haven't understood anything.
En cambio, si somos seres humanos y disponemos...
However, as human beings, if we have a prior theory, we are able to interpret this scene as a sales transaction, the same scene the aliens described in such a bizarre way, using mundane terms.
Es decir, que ha llegado un ser humano...
In other words, we've seen a human being, which is a being who acts, has ends, and happens to value waking up in the morning more attractive than the day before. He or she goes into a pharmacy, and we have a concept of what that is, and a clerk comes out. The two discuss the different products, the clerk hands the customer a cosmetic, and the customer pays with money. Money is not money because of its essential physical components, but because the parties who participate in the process of social cooperation view it as a commonly and generally accepted means of exchange, whether it comes in the form of a piece of paper, gold, head of cattle, etc. We'll talk about this more when the time comes. Clearly, to understand what human beings do in the social world, we must have a prior theoretical framework that enables us to interpret ideas. As social scientists, that is the only way we can approach our object of research. Point number 4. In the world of the natural sciences, constant relationships exist between phenomena. Why? Well, we don't know. The fact is that they do exist. Whenever two atoms of hydrogen bond with one atom of oxygen, a molecule of water results. And if we turn on a light switch, there is a flow of energy and the bulb lights up. And tomorrow, the sun will rise at a time we know to within 100th of a second. A nautical almanac can give us that information. It's true that when we approach more complex phenomena, constancy is no longer in absolute terms, but in probabilistic terms. For instance, we know that in 80% of breast cancer cases treated with a certain type of chemotherapy, the cancer is cured, and it isn't cured in the other 20%. Nevertheless, the results do reflect constancy, though in probabilistic terms. Well, this is another point of radical difference with the world of the social sciences, because in the social sciences there are no constants. Everything is variable. Why are there no constants in the world of social science? Why is everything variable? What is the object of research in the social sciences, in economics? Ideas. And ideas, dear students, are not given. Instead, they change constantly as a result of human beings' creative capacity, which is the most intimate characteristic of our nature. Human beings have an especially creative nature. What do human beings create? Ideas. Ideas about what? Ends and means. How? Constantly. So the object of research in the social sciences consists of something that is perpetually changing, and therefore there are no constants. If you recall, that is why the future is always ineradicably uncertain, in the sense that it is not to come, like in the world of the natural sciences, but is to be made, and we must make it with our entrepreneurship. Our entrepreneurial capacity helps us to cope with this uncertainty, in that we tend to achieve the goals we set for ourselves, though these goals, which are the ends we value, are not given, but remain open to our ability to create, modify, join or vary them, or change them altogether. Institutions are the other tool that helps us face the ineradicably uncertain future. As you know, institutions, for instance, language, morality, law, money, are pattern behaviors we learn to adopt because we realize that they help us accomplish our ends. So, these are the two tools, if you will, that human beings have for facing the future, which is ineradicably uncertain, because it depends on our creative capacity with respect to ends and means.
No nos engañemos pensando que esto da...
Let's not kid ourselves into thinking these tools give constancy to the world. They simply permit us to contend with ineradicable uncertainty a bit more successfully. Even the social phenomena you think are the most constant are continually changing.
Y no confundamos una variación.
We mustn't mistake slow change for an absence of change. Even Spanish, as an evolutionary language we have inherited from our parents, is not a dead thing that will be spoken forever and ever, just as we are speaking it now. On the contrary, it is continually being altered due to entrepreneurial use, and new terms appear.
Y aparecen nuevos...
Many times my children use language I don't understand. Anyway, what I'm explaining is actually quite simple. If we could get into a time machine and travel back 50, 60, 100 years, we would see that the Spanish spoken then was not exactly the same as it is now, and it won't be the same 100 years from now either. It appears to be the same, but it's not. Even in the case of what appear to be the most constant institutional behaviors, we must not mistake slow change for an absence of change. For in the world of economic science there are no constants. Everything is variable, in the sense that the object of research is ideas, and ideas are subject to human beings' entrepreneurial creativity, which is our most innate characteristic. The quintessential feature of our human nature is creativity.
Y eso es lo que nos diferencia...
That's what distinguishes us from a piece of rock, a liver, or a plant.
La verdad es que lo estoy...
The fact is, though what I'm saying may seem abstract, it's actually pretty obvious.
Y claro, nos tiene que ser obvio que si estamos estudiando...
It should be plain to us that if we are studying the ideas people generate, how people act and how they interact, and as social scientists who view man as a creative actor, we clearly need to use a method radically different from the one suited to a natural scientist, who studies rocks, atoms, plants and livers, none of which are creative.
No son creativos. Debe de ser ya...
At this stage, it should be obvious that it is much more commendable to be a social scientist than a natural scientist. It's much more difficult to discover the scientific truth in our field than in that of physics or chemistry, regardless of how much math natural scientists use, how many men they put on the moon, and how many bridges they build, etc. Point number 5, our last point.
Y último.
In the world of the natural sciences,
No
the ultimate causes of phenomena are unknown.
fenómenos. ¿Cuál es la causa
What is the ultimate cause of the law of
de la ley
gravity?
de la gravedad? Siempre hay
There is always another cause to which we can attribute studied phenomena.
los fenómenos investigados.
In fact,
Nunca se termina.
natural science never ends, because a further cause is always discovered. That is the essence of the process of advancement in the natural
La
sciences.
ciencia natural. Como no saben los científicos
Since natural scientists don't know the ultimate causes of phenomena,
los fenómenos, establecen
they
relaciones
establish functional relationships between them.
funcional.
What is a function?
Una función es una
A function is a correspondence between two sets, the original set and the image set,
conjunto imagen. La correspondencia
a one-to-one correspondence.
uno a uno, ¿eh? Y se
So
dice,
we say that y is f of x.
por cada
For each member of the original set, there is a corresponding member of the image set.
elemento del conjunto imagen. Y se puede incluso
We could even draw a graph.
hacer una representación gráfica.
Nevertheless, because natural scientists don't know the ultimate cause of phenomena, they can actually express their functions in inverse form. In other words, they don't know if y is f of x or x is g of y, the inverse function, for they don't know the ultimate cause of phenomena.
Entonces, las relaciones
So the relationships natural scientists study are functional relationships of mutual determination.
mutua determinación.
Y is f of x or x is g of y. They are reciprocal relationships.
La ciencia natural
Natural science consists of finding the constant parameters of those functions.
funciones, aunque no sepan,
Those scientists don't know the ultimate cause of phenomena, and a mutual relationship exists between them.
relación entre los mismos.
In contrast,
En el mundo
in the
de la-
world of the social sciences, we do know the ultimate cause of phenomena. The truth is, God had made it pretty damned hard for us economists. I mean, what a situation. Pretty tough.
menuda.
Are we going to be able to do a little economics, what with 6 billion men, women and children, each discovering what they please at every moment? Granted, institutional behavior and people's capacity to achieve what they desire, or to tend to achieve it, make it a little easier, but still, well, at least he wanted to compensate us with a few things, because if not, we would be lost as social scientists. And one of the things he has compensated us with is the fact that in economics we do know the ultimate cause of all phenomena. The ultimate cause, which gives rise to all phenomena, is precisely the concept of human action. It is the starting point, the irreducible premise, the original cause of all the phenomena we are going to study. Therefore, in economics, relationships are not functional, as in y is f of x or x is g of y, but instead they are, please write this down, genetic causal. We know the origin of phenomena, and the origin is creative, entrepreneurial human action, and it generates all the other laws successively. In economics, relationships are unidirectional. They start from an origin, creative, entrepreneurial human action. And from there we are going to gradually construct all the laws of economic science. In contrast, natural scientists do not know the origin of phenomena, their ultimate cause. What they do is establish constant relationships through laboratory experiments, and they analyze these relationships as functions that can be expressed in inverse form. They analyze reciprocal relationships. Our analysis leads us to a double conclusion. The social sciences are in both a superior and an inferior position with respect to the natural sciences. The sense in which social scientists find themselves in an inferior position is obvious. It's clear, for we have enormous difficulty in practicing our discipline, because the object of research is not directly observable. It is ideas, and they cannot be measured. There is no constancy. Everything is variable. Nevertheless, something compensates us for this and places us in a superior position with respect to natural scientists. I'm referring to a point I have just made. In economics, we do know the original cause of all phenomena. It is human action, and relationships are genetic, causal, and unidirectional. Human action gives rise to everything else. There is another sense in which we are in a superior position, and I think I have mentioned it in class. Only in social science does the scientist share the same nature as those he or she observes. In other words, believe it or not, I am a human being, and I share the same nature as the human beings I analyze as an economist, and this provides me with first-hand knowledge of incalculable value. Natural scientists lack this knowledge of their object of research. I am a human being who acts, and therefore I know by introspection, introspección in Spanish, the word refers to the observation of one's own ideas, thoughts and feelings, which leads to intimate first-hand knowledge. I know by introspection what it is to act.
Las ciencias de la acción humana, las que me he referido ahora en general,
the sciences of human action, to which I have referred in general, divide into two very large branches, theory and history.
La teoría de la acción humana sería...
The theory of human action is economics as we have approached it up to now. That is, theory is a formal, abstract, qualitative and general study of the processes of human interaction.
Mientras que la historia, la segunda rama esencial.
History, the other essential branch the social scientist needs, consists of the systematic study of past events related to human action. These past events related to human action may be from the distant past, which in colloquial terms we call history, or they may be from the recent or very recent past. In fact, what happened this morning is already history.
En las ciencias sociales, a la historia del pasado reciente...
In the social sciences, the history of the recent past is called the economic structure. That's why I've written here, history or structure. In colloquial terms, history refers to the events of the more distant past, and structure refers to recent history. The global economic structure, or Spain's economic structure, is the recent history of the global economy, or of Spain's economy. It is history from last month, or last year, but it is history. In fact, everything that took place a second ago is already history.
Siguiendo la más pura tradición aristotélica,
in the purest Aristotelian tradition, remember Aristotle? It's not that I'm a fan of his. Actually, I'm even less a fan of Plato. I think he was an unforgivable scoundrel. And Socrates, we will see. We'll talk about Socrates when the time comes. Aristotle is an exception for the most part, but not entirely. He was, we might say, the salaried tutor of the greatest tyrannical, genocidal dictator of his time, Philip of Macedon. And he also tutored the wilder and more paranoid Alexander the Great. We'll talk about this later on. In any case, Aristotle did make a series of enormously valuable contributions, mainly in the field of epistemology. Aristotle makes a philosophical distinction between two concepts, the concept of form and the concept of matter. Form? Well, a person sees 1,000 glasses. A big glass, a small glass, a crystal glass, a plastic glass, a red glass, a white glass, a whiskey glass. In the end, we know the form of a glass, in theoretical or conceptual terms, regardless of any specific historical manifestation. The study of the form of human interactions, in the Aristotelian sense, gives rise to economic theory, and to that we will devote this course. Meanwhile, the study of the matter, the specific manifestation of a particular glass, so to speak, of human interactions, gives rise to history, both form and matter. Both theory and history are equally important when it comes to acquiring an adequate knowledge of social reality.
Repito que son igualmente importantes, se encuentran al mismo nivel, la teoría y la historia.
I repeat, they are equally important. Theory and history are at the same level. However, according to Carl Menger, the following is crucial. First, we must not make the error of failing to distinguish between theory and history. It's true that they're equally important, but they're different. Epistemologically, theory is one thing, form, and history is something different. Second, we must avoid committing the even more fundamental error of thinking we can deduce theoretical or formal laws from a knowledge of history, in other words, from matter. In the time of Menger, the founder of the Austrian school, this was the error committed by the German historicists led by Schmoller. Today, a legion of positivists and even mathematical equilibrium economists are committing this error. They believe that by conducting numerous historical studies or empirical tests, they can come to know something in theoretical terms. Nevertheless, as I will show later on, the nature of the relationship between theory and history is exactly the opposite. We cannot deduce any theoretical knowledge from history. Instead, the reverse is true. We can only practice history by interpreting past events in light of a prior theory, which we have been able to independently formulate. It is impossible to deduce theory from history. We have already seen that social and historical events are extremely complex, and that they consist of unobservable ideas others have about what they do or did in the past. No one can observe history, but a person can interpret it and sort out those complex phenomena if he or she first has a theory. In other words, theory is the sine qua non, or essential condition for practicing history, for interpreting historical events. Without a prior theory, there is no historical reality, but instead just an incomprehensible mass of events and data.
De hecho, les tengo que decir, la evolución de Mises es curiosa. Mises estudia Derecho y su primer...
In fact, I must say, Mises's development was curious. Mises studied law, and his first book was about history. He wanted to be a historian, and he wrote a book about the history of servitude in Galicia. Not Spanish Galicia, but Austro-Hungarian Galicia, close to Hungary. When he finished writing his book, he came across a copy of Menger's work, Principles of Economics, and Mises became aware of his own ignorance. He said to himself, I can't be a historian if I don't become an economic theorist first, because I can't interpret what goes on. So I'm going to first make the effort to become an economist, and that is why you have human action. Mises's goal was to be a historian, but he understood that he could not practice history at all without first having a formal, conceptual, theoretical framework, and so he became a great theorist. We must begin by understanding that theory is one thing. It is knowledge that is general, abstract, and formal, related to form, and it concerns the processes of historical interaction. And history is something different. History is specific knowledge about past events connected with human action. To practice history, we must first have a theory. That is why there's an arrow here, pointing from left to right. We can't know anything about history if we don't first have a theory that enables us to interpret real events. Popper, who isn't a hero of mine, wrote, "All facts are theory-laden." That is, all historical facts are loaded with theory. I am even more radical than Popper, and I join Mises in saying that there is no history without theory. Why? Because without a formal conceptual framework, we cannot interpret past events related to human action. We cannot interpret the economist's object of research, which is ideas others have about what they do, about the ends that are worthwhile and the means they believe are available to help them achieve these ends. Therefore, theory is essential to the practice of history. It is the necessary condition for the practice of history.